scored every single game, and then he was called up to the NHL, signed a $57 million contract. He was first round draft pick, millions of dollars. That all sounds great. But if you're not performing, then that's could be as much as millions of pounds on top of you of responsibility. So we're the first brothers to win a national championship, medals in the same event. You can actually get more excited from the lesson of a really bad race or a really bad failure, way more than winning.
All right, welcome to the Evolving Potential Podcast. This is episode number 35. Today I have on the show Seth Pepper, and I'm Todd Smith. Seth held the title of the fourth fastest swimmer in the world by the age of 20, only 6 years after even learning how to swim. He's been sponsored by Nike and won gold medals at both the Pan Pacific Games and the World University Games and ranked number 1 in the world. He's a 23-time All-American, 2-time national champion, and University of Arizona record holder in 7 events where he earned his degree in psychology and a spot in the Hall of Fame. Seth is now an elite mental performance coach and speaker with clients ranging from athletes, coaches, and teams within the PGA, MLB, NFL, NHL, NCAA, F1, and more, as well as Netflix directors, fashion designers, content creators, CEOs, and businesses. Seth teaches and talks about how to unlimit your potential, his company, through optimizing mental capabilities, training in identity, pressure, confidence, resilience, competition, and joy. Welcome, Seth.
Thank you. Appreciate it. That was great.
Right. Good. So first and foremost, I would like to hear some of the results you've been able to achieve with others and a few of your most powerful techniques that you're currently using. And then I want to go back to definitely hear the story about you at 14 and how you got into all this.
Yeah, that sounds good. Let's see. For me, I think that some of the big wins have been fun, working with an LPGA player in particular. She had been on tour for 12 years and had never won. And so when I met her, I wanted to start with a challenge. And I said, she'd been second a bunch of times. And so my challenge was, are you tired of getting second place? And that was a challenge for her and for me, because you're not going to make a statement like that unless you feel like you're, a solution to that. And so she took the challenge, and within about a year and a half, she was able to win her first title after 246 starts.
Wow.
So that was definitely one of the big highlights. I've enjoyed, working and being able to unlock and get to that next level. And it was definitely a journey, because at that time she was looking to possibly retire. Just had back surgery and was barely walking. So the profound journey with that. ATP top 5 player in the world. Work to win the next tournament. And, again, just unlocking things. Formula One.
What is ATP? Can I ask? Sorry.
Yeah. That is for men's tennis. So professional tennis. So, yeah. And then you mentioned the Formula race car drivers. So, working with some of the best drivers in the world, and, just confirming messages from their team, messages like, thank you for making them a champion. They were able to get on the podium, and that's a big deal in Formula racing. So along the way, and then also one that is in an upcoming documentary, and I use it as an example for, speaking, and also the power of simplicity, making a simple adjustment that makes a big impact, um, is Dylan Gunther, who he has he was in the minor leagues of the AHL, that feeds into the NHL, and so we started having regular conversations, and um, we were able to unlock something where he was able to go from not being able to score. It had been 7 games in the minor
Mhm.
leagues, and this is a first round draft pick, so that was a pretty significant amount of games to go without any results. We made a simple change. Of course, he has to go and do it, so and take the suggestion and run with it. And he was able to, and scored every single game. And then he was called up to the NHL, scored every game that he was in, and became the leading scorer of that team. Signed a $57 million contract, and
Whoa.
yeah, and then this year he was one of only 10 players in the NHL to score 40 goals or more. So that's like a significant um, marker. So yeah, to go from the bottom to the top. Um, and what's interesting is that you asked about a tool. Um, for me, I'm always trying to make the mental and the emotional. Um, I'm trying to take something that's intangible and make it tangible. So having tools, is a kind of a practical way to look at it. So with Dylan, for example, and this has worked for a number of others, with similar results. Um, for me, I listen and I try to empathize where they're at, because everyone is different and I have to meet them where they're at. It's not like I can just stand here and say, well, I did all these things. Sometimes, when you started to read off all of my accomplishments, I always think that's an interesting conundrum, because just because you can do something does not mean that you can, coach something. There's
Yeah.
plenty of very well known, um, unsuccessful, great athletes are great at whatever they do, and then it doesn't translate. So for me, and we'll, sounds like we'll have some time to be able to explore my story, is that I had some extreme success, but I had even more failure. And I think that's what makes it so that I can actually, first of all, be in front of someone and empathize where they're coming from, realize I don't have all the answers, and kind of sit in the discomfort of not knowing. And then we kind of
Mhm.
work together in that discomfort. So with Dylan, I could feel the discomfort. He whenever he described what he's going through, it just sounded and felt heavy.
Mhm.
And so I this very simple tool, I learned it from other professional tennis players, actually, and they were twins. They are twins. I still around them, and in order to help them to win their first title, um, you know, siblings can be opposites, and so one sibling is really carefree, just would go out and play, and just do what he's supposed to do and have a good time doing it. And then his other brother mentioned that when he stepped on the court, he just he just didn't seem like, whenever we talked, it seemed like it was heavy to him, like he wasn't enjoying it. And I said, well, why is that? You're supposed to be enjoying this thing. You're playing this sport, playing it, right? Keyword.
Mhm.
And he said, well, one of us has to be the responsible one. And immediately I was, oh, okay, that's what it is. Okay, so you're taking this thing very serious. And I'm not going to disagree with you that, you know, accountability is important. But going out there and performing, with this great weight on your shoulders is not helping you. So I said, you could have that weight and that responsibility all day long, but I'm going to focus on you being in the performance environment. So I made it kind of up on the spot. They say the monkey on your back. So I said, you don't just have a monkey on your back, you have an ape. And the ape is extra heavy, and it stands for the stories that you're carrying, the stories that you tell yourself, which is the past. which is the current, and which is the future. And so let's go to Dylan with this, because I said, are you open to the ape? Because I asked Dylan, what's it like for you when you step on the ice? And he said, and I could tell. And so I filled in the blanks to see if I was right. I said, does it feel heavy? Do you feel tired? And he said, yeah, exactly. Like, how do you know that? Because I'm in great shape, but when I step on the ice, I just feel really, really out of shape and tired. And I said, yeah, and it feels like a job, one that you just maybe even resentful for, because you're supposed to love this thing, and it really is something that you almost feel forced to do. And so he's like, yeah, exactly. I didn't even want to get on the plane to go the next competition. So I said, we got the ape, and told him about the tennis players. And the whole idea is you have a choice on whether or not you put the ape on your shoulders. It's not like
Mm.
it's forced. So you pick up the ape and put it on your shoulders when you think about the past. So for him, he's a national hero. He'd scored the gold winning goal for the world championship, junior national champion, or junior world champion team
Oh,
from
wow.
Canada. And so he had this, career in the past. And then the current was, he was first round draft pick, millions of dollars. That all sounds great. But if you're not performing, then that's could be as much as millions of pounds, on top of you, of responsibility. And, maybe it's even a fan base that's not super nice, or, it could
Mm.
be a lot of different things. So, especially if you're carrying it around. And then the future is your dreams. So, of course, a hockey player wants to play in the Stanley Cup and, realize those childhood dreams. And that probably feels really heavy and maybe even getting further away. And he said yes to all of the above. And so I said, okay, tonight you have a game. Um, just run a little test. We'll test this out. The ape does not go on the ice. You can carry it all day long, kind of like the tennis player. I told him, you could be responsible and heavy and serious and all that stuff all day long, but for the time of the match, I want the ape does not get to go out there. Okay. So I said the same thing to Dylan, and he said, sure, I like that. And then I said, take me back to what it was like to play this sport when you were 10 years old. Now, there's a reason to the age, that your best, level of performance, it's not just sports, it's just life, is in the flow state, the zone, the moment, being present. Those are kind of the catchphrases for basically the
Mm.
same state. And so we are in that flow or in the zone when we're little kids, all the way up until 8. We're like that all the time, which just basically means we're just fully present. Our experience is the five senses. And we just like, everything is about just doing. It's not thinking. And so I was like, when you were 10, and the reason why I chose 10 is because you're 2 years older and you're kind of waking up. So you're making
Mm.
choices, but you're also, majority of your time is still in that flow in the zone. I said, when you were 10, what was hockey for you? And you can imagine the same with the tennis players. And he said, well, it really is pretty simple. It was just like see puck, hit puck. And I said, exactly,
Nice.
exactly. And then I said, but what was the experience also? Because see puck, hit puck, that's your sight. What about smelling? Oh yeah, when you're in an arena, an ice arena, it smells different. Yeah, yeah, and you like that. Oh, love it. It reminds you that you're playing hockey. I said, okay, and then what else? And then he went into all the different other senses, anywhere from, good skating really fast and feeling wind at his face. And I was like, okay, imagine that. Doesn't that feel good? He's like, yeah, I love going fast just for that. And I said, okay, what else? And he goes, well, when I go really fast, my skates, they cut the ice just right. And I can hear it. There's a particular
Mm.
sound that they make. See how we have all these senses. And when we're a little kid, we're just completely immersed in senses, not thought, not story. Right.
Yep.
And so I said, you sound a lot like Kobe. Kobe Bryant. I use him as an example because he kind of serves as an archetype of someone that really broke down the progress of getting good at stuff, mastery, because he wasn't just a natural talented basketball player. He definitely had ability, but his great, I think, strength tool was his mind. Breaking
Mm.
things down and rebuilding them. And so I said, "You sound exactly like Kobe's," because Kobe was all about hearing the arena, watching the rim and how the basket, is just right, and how the ball, makes these sounds, and the smell and all those different things. And I said, "You sound exactly like him." And so I said, "Tonight, what I want you to do is I want you to go to this game, and the ape doesn't go across. They have like a doorway, so that's called the gate. So the
Oh yeah, yeah.
ape does not cross the gate. Okay." And then I said, "I want you to just no plays, nothing. I want to see puck, hit puck. I want you to skate really fast, feel the wind at your face. I want you to just hear everything that's going on, the cutting of the ice with your skates and all that stuff. And I just want you to go back to being 10 years old." And that was it. And so, I already told you the end result, and it was that simple. And so our conversation revolves around this. We still meet on a regular basis of different examples from different sports and different areas of basically, I mean, there's a lot of other tools that I use, but that's like a really simple one that people can access right away. And there's all kinds of they just had the NBA finals, and there was an example of someone on the New York Knicks who was talking about, this outstanding performance he had had. And he's like, "I don't know what it was. It was like I was just like this little kid, and I started
Nice.
having fun, and it just was so easy, and I felt like everything was effortless." Well, that's where the flow state gets its name. One thing naturally or easily flows into the next, right? So it's just basically kind of waking us up to what is this all about. So
Mm.
I like to keep it really simple and say it's about humans and the human condition, and how do we not just survive but thrive. So
I love that. I love that. So real quick, how would you, if someone asked you what is mental performance? I like to ask all my guests that. What is mental performance in your own words?
well, to me it's a simple equation, which is your optimal performance, whatever you want to call that, you being at your best, equals your ability, right? I'm not saying talent, will not use the T word, your ability, right? Minus resistance. So the
Mm.
only thing that holds you back is resistance. You could call it noise, you could call it a lot of different things, but we'll just call it resistance. And resistance is created by you. So when people will ask me, "What do you do?" and the simplest answer is a lot of times it's just me helping people get out of their own way, because we really are the ones that get in our own way. And I can speak firsthand that, some of my biggest failures came because I did it to myself, not because someone else did it to me.
Love that. I love that. That's a great explanation. Super simple. Okay, so now you're 20 and you're one of the fastest swimmers in the world. How do you get to this point? Let's go back.
Um, okay, so I was 14, so 20 sounds older-ish, but if you consider I learned how to swim when I was 14. Most people learn their sport, at a young age. Probably 6 is, kind of an average age. And swimming involves a different medium, so it's not just, walking, running, or doing things that you might naturally already be kind of doing.
Yeah.
Swimming's different, especially if you don't know how to swim. And so I just fell in love with the Olympics from a very young age. But I wasn't in a family where we were exposed to any sports. My parents were, my dad built guitars and my mom was an author. So
Nice.
I was
Nice.
surrounded by, just different people. They were artists, I guess you could say.
Yeah.
And so sports was not something they ever talked about. We never watched it, except watching the Olympics was probably about it. And so I just came up with this crazy idea, I mean, I guess I would say the idea kind of found me. I mean, I felt inspired by this thing called the Olympics. And I think it was the Olympic, not just the Olympic dream, but the Olympic experience. Now I understand it because I've been on the other end of it, of going as an audience member, and now I realize what I was really searching for. Because if you get a chance to go to the Olympics, the World Cup might be similar, but the Olympics is definitely just like it is, where the world comes together and just has a big celebration of
Mm.
humanity, and it just happens to be centered around sports.
Yeah.
So that's what I think I was really striving for. It wasn't. I thought it was the Olympic gold, but I think it was deeper than that. Um, so I started studying the Olympics. Didn't have a sport. Narrowed it down to swimming, um, and so there's a girl that won. She won a gold medal timing. I always believe in timing. And announcer asked her, if someone out there wants to do what you just did, what would you tell them? And I
Mm.
remember saying, she's speaking to me. Whatever she says, I'm going to do it.
Nice.
So I came from a small town, and she said, I went through a YMCA. So I didn't even know if we had a YMCA. So I looked it up, and we did. And I went down
Nice.
to the pool, and they walked up to the head coach, and I said, I want to go to the Olympics. Can you help me? Now, that's a very specific, clear question, and it's a little strange. Probably never
Yeah.
heard anyone be that
Yep.
direct.
Very
And so,
ambitious.
yes, yes, I'm not just here to be, good. I want to go
Yeah.
to the top. I want to be the best on the planet. Um, and so he smiled because he's got a great sense of humor, and he said, "Well, do you know how to swim?" I said, "No, I don't." And he started laughing, and he goes, "Okay, no problem, but you're gonna have to go learn with the little kids." And so I was put with second graders, so they're 8 years old, and they're half my height. And the reason why I tell that part is, first of all, it gives you context of like where I was really starting. I was really starting from the beginning,
Yeah.
with nothing. Um, but it really gave me this space. Again, what we were talking about Dylan was that he had a past, and the past was he was carrying. And it was actually not just slowing him down, but destroying him, his career at
Mm.
least. And I had no past. So the contrast helps me, that I know that if we can let go of your past, then that's like the beginning of really speeding up the process of improvement,
Mm.
because you're not really living in this winning and losing space. You're in the space of what we were talking about with Kobe. You're in a learning space, right? So everything was about learning, and it really wasn't about failure, because I was just I remember the first race. It was down and back, and I made it down, but I couldn't make it back, and I think I drank half the pool, right?
Oh no.
Yeah, it was brutal. I never thought I'd quit anything, but I literally couldn't go anymore, right? I might drown. So that's where I started. But at the same time, my dad, and I think this was the advantage of having parents that didn't know anything, but were loving and supporting, and in the idea of just going after whatever you want. And so my dad always had books around on self improvement, all
Nice.
kinds of different things. And so I thought, like, hey, this is the perfect project to see if those books actually work.
Mm.
So that's what I started doing. And he was also really helpful in saying, okay, well, I'm reading this book, and maybe this might be interesting. This might be interesting. And he had this one book that changed my life. And in it, it had a few pages that described this study of basketball players in Australia. And they took this group, three groups actually, and they were shooting free throws. And one group did traditional free throw training. Um, and then they had another group that didn't do anything so that they could compare. And then they had another group that all they did was work on the mental side of things, and they didn't even touch a basketball for 3 months. Afterwards, they measured them all. The group that was physical, traditional, had improved 24%. The group that didn't do anything didn't get anything. Nothing happened with that group. And then the group that did the mental improved 23%. So almost the same amount
Wow.
as the physical. So immediately I started doing addition and I was like, okay, 24, 23, put
Yeah.
those two together. I'm going to exponentially improve. I'm going to go, have an edge,
Wow.
X factor. And so I just started to dig into like, okay, how do you train your mind? What are some of the tools? And, I think we also, my family had like this sort of spirituality, if you will, or belief or faith or something in being able to kind of create your futures. Because a lot of the self help books were about manifesting and, you
Yep.
know, thoughts becoming something and law of attraction stuff.
Yep.
So a lot of that stuff now is really popular, but back then no one was talking about it. And so for me, it was like, okay, how do I, kind of, you hear this a lot now. I mean, the NBA finals, someone was saying, speak it into existence. So now these are like phrases and techniques that are becoming more and more mainstream. So for me, it was always about tricking my mind into believing that I was already at the destination. And so subconscious was the area that I really focused on. Your subconscious drives the car so that you don't even need to think about driving a car, you know, and to really
Yep.
wake people up to, you realize like you don't have to think about driving to the store and you can multitask and have a phone call on the way, right?
Mhm.
Like that's miraculous if you really think about it. And what if you could take that power, because it's like computer, supercomputer level processing. What if you did that so that you had, GPS coordinates of your goals and you're speaking them into existence and you're doing this on a long-term basis and you just find yourself, becoming your goals is what I call it now, rather than trying
Mm.
to achieve something. And so that's what I did is I just used all that stuff in the books and got creative with my own version. And so I got a Sports Illustrated with, it was the Olympic edition, and they had Pablo Morales, who was a famous Olympian. And so I cut his picture out, and then I took my picture and I put them on the wall so that they were touching. And again, this is subconscious. This is like, back then we didn't have vision boards. No one was doing anything like that. So it was more like almost like a post-it note, a sticky of just putting it up. And every time I'd see it, it would remind me to think about it. Right.
Mm.
And have this on, now I would call it an ongoing conversation with the future.
Nice.
And, and so in 4 years after learning how to swim, I became the state champion. And then from
Jeez.
there, yeah, that's a pretty short period of time.
Yeah.
And it was doing all these really weird, like it was the mother of invention is necessity. And so I created this incredible necessity to get to the Olympics. And you find ways to get there if that's your focus, if that's your obsession. The Kobe Bryant says in his Mamba mentality, obsession is not an option. That's rule number one. And it's just basically fall in love with the, you don't have to fall in love with the thing. Like you don't have to fall in love with basketball or swimming, but you at least have to kind of fall in love with the process of getting better, right?
Yep.
That's key. And so for me, I was just so focused on this goal. And now I reflect on it and it wasn't even really about swimming. Swimming was just something I chose to get there. I really feel like I could have chose a different sport and got there because it wasn't about natural ability. It was just basically just creating this thing and just physically and mentally dedicating every resource I had towards it. And it just
Mhm.
happened to happen in a swimming pool. So 4 years, state champion. I reach out to all the top 20 schools. So everything for me is kind of like a spreadsheet. So very deliberate, very focused. So top 20 schools, I wrote a letter to each one. I put together like a little packet that was like all of my best stuff. And it was
Wow.
basically saying, hey, I just learned how to swim and look at what I've done in 4 years. Imagine what we could do together. So it's kind of like a mission statement. And I got
Nice.
a really good response from it. And so I chose to be in the most competitive environment was the conference, Pacific Conference, where most of the Olympians were. And I went to the University of Arizona. And my second year, I'm going against Anthony Nesty, who was the gold medalist, and I'm beating him most of the way until the final stroke. So that's how he won the gold medal. That's how he beat me.
Wow.
So that's just 6 years of from learning how to swim, having the coach laugh, and here I was. I did it again the next year, same guy, same scenario, and then finally I won the national championship my final year. And
Wow.
so two-time national champion and went the fastest split ever recorded. Um, so yeah, that's kind of like maybe a good point to, the start to kind of getting that launch. And that was kind of the launch into the more international space. And then my brother, if you're interested, I can tell you a little bit about my brother because he was the first
Yeah,
person.
definitely. Let's come back to that in a second. I'm curious first and foremost, did you have any sort of feelings about starting at the age of 14 and being put with, the 8-year-olds? Was there like, oh God, this is embarrassing, or is there any of that, or was your goal just so important to you that that just didn't even come across your mind? I'm curious how you might have handled that, I guess, mentally.
Well, there were little moments that I can remember of embarrassment just because my friends were my age on the team. And then I'd have to say goodbye to them. And then I'd have to go get my butt kicked by their younger brother. So there was moments as a teenager going, oh, this is a little awkward. Um, but ultimately, no. I mean, to me, it's like if you just are obsessed about getting somewhere, you'll do anything, and just access was all I was looking for. And so no, and it didn't last for very long. I got to the point where I could make it up and back, and I could beat the kids, and then you move up and you keep moving up. So I think if you're obsessed enough, you stop taking the results personally. I
Mm,
think that's a big thing that I try to get across now is that you choose if to you choose whether or not failure exists. And so again, to steal a line from Kobe, Kobe said, "Failure is a figment of your imagination. It doesn't even exist. It's just a result that you decided to make into something." And he said, "You can't really point to failure." And that's the way I approached it was that I never failed. And in fact, later on, my university coach, we had a lot of success together. And then he went on to become the national team, so the USA swimming team uh, coach first, head coach for the Olympic team, and then the director of USA Swimming. So he was Michael Phelps, like he was in charge of all of those Olympics.
oh
So
wow.
he's around the best of the best. And he said the thing that set you apart, Seth, is that I saw you get really excited from really bad races that you could learn a lot, as opposed to easy wins. And so all of these top level like performance tips or tools, tricks, whatever you want to call each of them, a lot of them are composed of tiny little switches where you turn it's almost like a light switch you flip from one to the other. So um, one is failure. So failure is actually information, and you actually gain the most amount of information from failure. And so if you can get excited or turned on by learning, which is collecting downloading information, you can actually get more excited from the lesson of a really bad race or a really bad failure, way more than winning. Winning
Mm,
kind of almost is, I dare I say, it's not boring, but it's not as exciting if you're really into the learning of it. And once I flip that, that's like, watch out because I just I'm here to learn. I'm not here, there's nothing you can take away from me. You know?
nice. Nice. I'm curious what it looks like day to day. Let's say you're 14, you're 15, you're 16. You're doing your lessons, you're doing swim team, and then are you at home meditating on top of that, or are you just like doing it in the car on the way there? Like what does that look like? And did your parents think you're crazy for any of this?
Well, my dad was well, they didn't know our times, so that was an important part, that they were not people that people might actually just say that they could be critical of it. They were non-supportive, non-existent, but I was so high strung, and self motivated that even if my dad did know my times, I'd say like, oh, too much pressure, ease up. So I like the fact that they just said, okay, this is your hobby, this is your project. I had to get myself to work out, so I was riding a bike 10 miles just to go to the workout. So you'd make
Jeez.
the most of the workout if it took that much effort just to get there.
Hmm.
So they weren't they in as far as judgment, they were big time dreamers, believers. So my dad was into it, like but he was kind of like this sort of magical, quality of it. Yeah, the Olympics. Oh, that's cool. What are you doing now? He was like we were enjoying this sort of possibility, and so he was just supportive, but he was treating it kind of like a hobby. Um, and you'd feed books to me on different things. But yeah, he was just. I think the gift that I got from my parents was that they gave us both space, and I think
Mm.
space is where growth happens, and that I think can be the greatest gift: space to explore and unconditional support. So
Yeah. Yeah. So are you like sitting around and meditating at home, or how is this? What's your actual routine? And I'm sure it developed over the years as well. Like maybe you started off doing just your pictures side by side, and then eventually you're doing actual mental exercises. Eventually you're probably putting a little bit more time into it as you're seeing results from it. I'm curious what that looks like.
absolutely. Okay, so definitely had goals. I had all kinds of goals, and I put them up. And I even wrote my goals in glow in the dark paint and put it on the ceiling, so that in case I woke up in the middle of the night to go to the bathroom, I would see my goals all the time,
That's
all
so
the
cool. That's
24
so
hours.
cool.
That's how obsessed I was. And again, it was programming the subconscious mind. So it was, oh, isn't that cool? The goals, I get excited, but it was more like, hey, I got to keep putting imprinting my computer with what we're looking for, what we're working on.
Mm,
Um, Definitely did a lot of visualization. Visualization to me, I am super practical. So visualization is as a specialty word that you don't. There's only what visualization is visualization. So um, I I would negotiate with myself because I'm very you develop self awareness. So you're almost like you're having this conversation with yourself.
yeah.
And so for me, visualization was going to a movie theater and watching a movie that you get immersed in, and then it pulls you in and you become the character. And so I would go to this mental movie theater. I would see this over and over and over. So the question that I get asked a lot is, what does it feel like to win a national championship? And for me, I'd been to this movie so many times that when I actually did it, it was just like I got to invite all my family and friends and the whole audience into the movie theater, and we all got
Wow.
to experience it together. It just
Wow.
made it real. So the idea on the practical end was, if I go to this future event, every time I go there, it's going to become more familiar. And every time I go there, I'm going to increase the chance that I will be more calm, less nervous when I actually have to go do it. So
Mm,
it was a matter of repeat exposure to it.
I
So that
love that.
visualization was definitely one of them. Another thing that I did, I mean, I was psychotic, like the best version of psychotic, or delusional is probably a better book. I call it constructive delusion.
Yeah.
I was
Nice.
literally I was trying to trick myself into believing things that hadn't happened yet. And so one thing with swimming, it's all, racing time. And so at the end of the season, you rest. Yes, you shave your body, that's part of the whole thing, and you drop a ton of time. Now the thing is that you don't go your best time until that very last race. And you go to that very last race and maybe something happens in that race and you don't end up with a great time, but you know that you're faster than the time. Well, I'm in this really compressed experience where I don't have time to have even an average season. Every single one of my seasons has to be phenomenal, even if
Mm.
I make it up. So what I would do is I would go back over that race and I would remove all the imperfections. So I'd make the start perfect and I'd make the turns perfect. And then I'd kind of figure out like what was my speed. And the times were always faster in my imagination. And I would take and make that the time. And then I would remove proof of all the real times. And I would be self improvement in the mental side is if you tell a lie to yourself over and over and over, eventually you'll believe it. So I
Yep.
was telling this lie. And so eventually, and it's not even about convincing yourself of the time, it was making that time so real that you now became almost bored with that time so that you could now springboard into a new set of goals because for me it was like, okay, if I didn't have a good start or turn or whatever, why would I want to train a whole season to go back to the same place, the same race, to go the time that you knew you could have done the previous season? So why not take all the imperfections out and then live it as if you're already at that speed, and then you're naturally going to want more. So it was all
Mm.
about tricking myself into wanting more and creating this future. And so I called it mental. Now I call it mental leapfrogging, where
Nice.
you're constantly tricking yourself into believing that you're faster than you are, so that you can set goals. Because the whole idea is, um, you know, there's a resting state to a cell, and so if you're used to a really loud environment, then I've had roommates like this where they have to have the TV on in order to go to sleep because they had a lot of siblings growing up, but their resting state was noise, a lot of noise compared
Mm.
to me because I didn't grow up with that.
Yeah.
So all of it was creating this exposure of in your mind being so fast that now that's normal and you want more. So it was all about tricking my mind all the time. It was just using my mind as and I did all kinds of stuff. Another thing that I used to do is I was striving for perfection. That's mastery, right? And so I wanted to have a perfect stroke. And then I thought, what if I could take a perfect stroke? It's kind of like running. Take the perfect stride every single stride. Be a runner and
Mm.
perfection every single. So swimming, same thing. I wanted to have a perfect stroke. So in my mind, I was like, how? Because everything's based on your motivation, your necessity. How can I? And once I started pulling this apart and going back and studying like Michael Jordan did the same stuff. He was doing all kinds of mental things of taking things personal and having
Yeah.
grudges, lighting his fire inside.
Yep.
For me, it was the same thing. Like, what motivates me? And I was like, I like to stand for something. So, what if everybody around me, all of my teammates, the people that might be up on the pool deck, everyone's watching me in awe, and they're like just drop jaw drooling. I mean, totally delusional, crazy like world, but I knew that if people were watching me like that, then I would have a certain level of responsibility to have a perfect stroke. So
Mm.
again, it's getting in touch with what motivates you because I'll share some stuff with about my brother and what he achieved, but he's the opposite. That he doesn't care what other people think, but I do. And so I was just always trying to find buttons to push to create more and more of this obsession, of this necessity.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay. So now at some point your brother gets into to swimming.
Yeah.
Let's talk about that. Like, how does that work?
Okay. So I was there, very deliberate and just like a coach, actually wanting to know more than the coaches. And so my younger brother, he's 2 years younger, opposite, he saw that I had a lot of friends. And so he started following me to the pool because he wanted to have like a friend group like I did. And so for him, it was really social. He learned how to swim when he was 17, so he's even older than me.
Jeez.
Yeah, it doesn't even seem real. Um, so he's 17, junior in high school, I think, is where he started, and learns how to swim. And I have to leave for college. And I was talking to my coaches about this younger brother that I have. And what I used to do is I would take what I was learning, and you want to help out your sibling. So I would take him through everything. So he's the first person I work with. And so I was like, okay, visualization. Your voice is so important. So it keeps your attention. You're your world's greatest expert. These are kind of catchphrases I use a lot now with the tools that I have. But back then it was, we're going to make a visualization tape because we had tapes back then. And I'm going to make the script. And then I want you to read it, read the script because your voice is going to, capture your attention and you're going
Mhm.
to guide yourself through visualization. And I want you to listen to these tapes every single day, you know, and the other tools. And so I used to do things with him when I'd see him in person. So I remember it was like a big international meet, and I snuck him down onto the pool deck with my credentials. And back then we didn't have Michael Phelps, but we had our version, which was Matt Biondi. And so Matt's huge. He looks like an NBA player.
Oh,
And
wow.
so I'd say to Martin, my brother, go stand next to him, like stand right next to him. He goes, "Are you kidding me? You're crazy? No, I'm not going to do that."
Yeah.
And I said, "No, I want you to do it, and I want you to see that he's just a human being, because you got to knock that pedestal out from underneath him in your mind if you're going to beat him."
Mm.
So it was all about creating this connection in your mind that the future was normal. And so I I know that I exponentially sped up his progress because I later found out that his main motivation was just beating me. I didn't know that at the
That's funny.
time.
He's supposed to be better than his brother. Yeah.
That's it. Younger brother just wants to beat their older brother.
Yeah.
So he starts swimming. I'm in college. I'm, doing everything remote with him, like what I do with people now. And the coaches take an interest, and they're like, "Oh, you got a younger brother?" And yeah, he just learned how to swim and he's doing this. And they said, "Well, you know what? If he goes to a junior college for a year, because he needs to get one more year of experience, we'll take another look at him." So my brother took the challenge and he went to a junior school, junior college, and they liked him. Well, what they saw, the progress they saw, and so he came to the university, and eventually, his senior year, he too became a national champion, and
Wow.
we also won uh, medals at the World Championship. So we're the first brothers to win a national championship in the same event, and we're also the first brothers to win medals in the same event at World Championships. And we started crazy late, and both of us know that a major part of this was, the power of the mind. So
Yeah.
it's all about creating access to the future. And then with my brother, he was not really. I mean, he won nationals, but that was really like the coaches said. You know what the coaches said to him right before the start? They said, "Your brother did this. You can do this." And so it was going back to being a kid, just like Dylan, like what we were talking about. Where if Seth can do this, Martin can do this, and that's what he did. He didn't even realize who was in that race. It was the fastest heat ever, past Olympians, past national champions, and my brother in the outside
Gee.
lane. And he destroyed everyone. And it was this simple idea, this playful idea of that 10-year-old wanting to race his brother across the pool, right?
Wow.
And he just went out and did something he didn't even know was impossible. So,
That's crazy.
and his dream wasn't to be a great swimmer, like I said. His was to have his own show. He wanted his own show on the Discovery Channel. So I was like, well, this worked with swimming. I think this could work in other things. Why don't we apply it? And so a vision board obviously is you're putting pictures up and visually seeing it and imagining it. I was like, well, what if we had some video equipment, and what if I learned how to make the graphics and edit the videos, and we put together little versions of shows that would come off the Discovery Channel, and we would get the logo and everything. So
Oh,
we would do
nice.
that in between practices. We would go and film things, and then we'd post them. And within 2 or 3 years, the Discovery Channel, the one that we were focused on, not National Geographic or the other ones, the Discovery Channel contacted us and said, we'd like to give you your own show. And
No
so
way.
my brother got his own show on the Discovery Channel.
What the heck? What was the show?
Um, I think it's called The History of the Earth, yeah, yeah, like a series where they travel all over the world, and he's the Dr. Pepper of the family, so he has his doctorate in geology.
Wow. Wow. That's crazy.
So it's using all that stuff from those books. Apparently, it works.
Yeah. Yeah. That's a crazy. Okay. Okay. So now I'm curious, like, a lot of athletes are dealing with identity issues as they transition out of sports. So now you're at the top of your game, national championship, one of the fastest swimmers ever, gold medals at these different games. First and foremost, like, I know that apparently you didn't make it to the Olympics. So I'm curious about that, and obviously, to be sensitive about that. But also, like, then transitioning into, now I'm not doing sports anymore, and I'm becoming a coach, and I see the value in coaching others and helping others get to that level. Will you share your piece on that?
Yeah, yeah, definitely. Okay, so I basically did everything you could um, in swimming, and that includes the international meets. But the Olympics, okay, so let me back up because we were talking manifesting and all this thing. So remember Pablo, the person I put on my wall? Well, when I
Yep.
won the national championship, Pablo's the one that handed me the national championship trophy. So
Oh wow.
if that fits within your belief of the law of attraction, that's pretty specific.
Yeah.
He's the guy that was on my wall. He's the one that's handing me one of the most significant awards I would achieve. Right.
No way.
I'm in tears. I'm like, Pablo, you have no idea what this means. Like, you're
Yeah.
on my wall.
Yeah.
So I should have taken him off my wall because he did something that had never been done before. I still remember when I heard the news that he was coming out of retirement, and I got this bad feeling in my stomach. And I had a race against my idol for the Olympic spot. True
Oh,
story. He took the spot on the Olympic team that I would have taken. I would have been an Olympian if Pablo would have stayed in retirement. He came
wow.
out of retirement, beat me by 2 inches. He went to the Olympics. I had to stay home and watch it on TV. So yeah, yeah, that was a big one. And I came back 4 years later. Um, I really didn't have anyone in my life to have these really important conversations that I now have with others. So I had a lot of scar tissue from that one race. And then there was a big race at nationals in between where they kind of labeled me as the next great Olympian and talking about me and making a big deal. And I did the silliest, stupidest self sabotage thing where I was like, oh, well, my body likes to be warm and loose. And so I put all the covers on me in between prelims and finals, took a nap, and for 2 or 3 hours, just completely sweat out my race. Just so stupid. Um,
Wow.
and I went and fell on my face basically that night. And I never really got over it. And then by the time the Olympic trials came around, I really was kind of like, just I wasn't even there in that race. I was gone. But there
Man.
was this other race that came right after it that was just it's basically the 100-yard dash for running, the shortest race. Ours is a 50 meter sprint to say that you're the fastest person in the world. And I had always been really good at it. Um, but this time I was like, I'm just going to go have fun. Again, it's like Dylan. The race that I was really serious about, that I wasn't even close. Like I wasn't even really there. I mean, I'd qualified for finals, but no. But this race was fun. This is all about going back to being 10 years old again. And I just got in and took off and went as fast as I could. And I was one of the fastest in the world at it. But I missed the Olympic team by 4/100ths of a second. So the
What?
first time with Pablo 4 years ago was, or earlier, was about 2 inches. This one you couldn't even see with the naked eye. There's a guy that's walking the planet, Olympian, and then there's me who has these stories that I'm sharing with you, and you wouldn't have been able to tell the difference between us if you were to see the photo of the finish.
Gosh, gosh.
That's life. That's so that was reality. That's what I was dealt, and I did okay with it. But then when I was done with my sport, because to go all in, you put all into this identity of Seth the swimmer. And then once that, it's kind of like a movie ends, and who is Seth?
Yeah,
I was always playing this person. I had this identity so deep in everything I did. You walk into a room and everyone, if they knew you, they'd be like, oh, this is Seth the swimmer. You should meet him.
yeah.
Seth the swimmer. Oh, I've heard about Seth the swimmer. Right. And no longer did I have that sport or that identity. And I started having debilitating panic attacks. And I've always believed, even much back then, but especially now, that nothing is broken. You just have to take the time to understand what the lesson is. Kind of
Mm.
like learning how to swim, you know, just a learning approach. And so it's like, there's a purpose to this. Why is my mind doing this? It doesn't make any sense now, but maybe there's something to it. So I went through this program. It was repeat exposure at UCLA because I lived in Los Angeles at the time. And it was a support group, small little support group. Everyone had different triggers. One might have been a spider, another was an elevator, another was, for me, it was being in a car, which in LA is not a good thing.
Yeah.
And so what you do is you learn in a group setting that fear is something that's a perception. It doesn't exist on its own, kind of like how Kobe talks about failure. And so the whole idea was to go back into this fear and develop a different sort of self awareness and do it with baby steps. Remember, there was an old movie, What About Bob, taking baby steps.
Yeah.
So is this whole idea like, okay, if it's the elevator guy, just go and park in the parking lot. That might be the first level that will trigger you, and come back to the group next week and we'll talk about it. And it would all be encouraging, like, well, you didn't die, but yeah, man, I felt like, but yeah, I didn't die. And little by little, he would eventually go in the building, and then eventually he would go push the button, and eventually he would get in the elevator, and eventually he could ride the elevator because he had proved to himself that, that he was beyond the perception of that fear.
Mm.
So it's repeat exposure. And once I learned that my mind was messing with me, that, and I might use colorful language, my
That's
mind's
fine.
effing with me.
Yeah.
Then I said, okay, if my mind's effing with me, then I can F with it back. And so it became this whole idea of like kind of dismantling the button by dismantling my identity, and then just starting over from zero and trying to understand who Seth was. And once I really got to the core of that, and I'd given everything away, we could do a whole podcast on that, but I had given everything away. I was studying like, what's life all about? And it took years for me, at least. And then I'd come to a point where an understanding about it. And a friend of mine who had been with me the whole time asked me, well, what would you learn? And I just said, everything's made up. Business is made up, education's made up, everything's literally made up. And if it's all made up, then you can make it whatever you want. And that's what I had done with swimming, but I don't think I was really aware of that outside of the sports.
Mm.
And then I started to see like the matrix. Like all of a sudden I was like, oh, we are all just agreeing that this piece of paper called a dollar bill has a value.
Yeah.
Every single thing was like dismantling the perception, but not in a destructive way, in a constructive way. And so for me, that's life after Seth the swimmer. And so what I learned from panic attacks actually was that the reason why you have a panic attack, and this is with the yips, this is with a lot of different things that are similar that are fear based, um, is that you're what will happen is you're trying to control something that you don't have control over. So the blessing, if you lean into the panic attack and learn about it on its terms, is that it's teaching you that the only control that you have is letting go of control. And if you're an
Mm.
extremely controlling person that was able to achieve high levels of success in this sort of laboratory environment of sports, right? That is the hardest thing to do is let go of control.
Yeah.
But life has a way of just stopping you and saying, no, this is more important than anything. You have to learn how to let go of control. That's the only control you get. And it's such a beautiful, simple lesson, but it was scary as heck because you feel like your life's coming to an end, in
Yeah.
the panic mode. So for me, I buried my sort of past, all that swimming stuff, all the athlete stuff. I raised a family, and our kids were in a small school, same city where the university is, and some of the other parents, they were down at the university and they saw this name, Seth Pepper, on the wall, and
Nice.
they came back and they were like, any relation to you? Because I never talked about it. There was
Yeah.
no reason to for me. And I started telling him these stories, starting late, no specialization, go after your dreams, right? Dealing with panic attacks, all those sort of things. And they're like, this is really important. I think you should really get out and you should help people. So that's kind of the beginning, was having the encouragement of others saying, these stories are very important, especially now. So,
Mm.
a lot of credit to the community of just encouraging, get out there and at least tell your story.
Wow. Okay, and so now do you also help athletes with that stage? Or are you mostly just in the performance world itself? Like, are you helping athletes who are, in that place of, okay, now I'm out of sports. I don't know who the heck I am anymore. Please help me.
Yes, both. So definitely a lot that are in the sport, um, and then the transition will happen. At a certain stage. I What I learned from this dismantling is, to put it really simple, we are human beings. We're not human doings, right?
Mm.
So human being learns through failure. So one of your biggest, if you're, yeah, I think it's your biggest development stage is learning how to walk. And so the average toddler falls 69 times a day, but they don't have this
Wow.
identity of failure. They just keep getting up and more experience and just get better, right? And so that's the definition of growth for a human being, is to live in failure. And it's not a failure because you don't take that any of those results personally. Human doing is when you think that you are the results, that you are the swimmer, that you are the time, you are the grade, you are the salary. And so you need to separate those two, because you'll start to spiral when things don't look very good in performance. And so if I would have known what I know now, I would have done that earlier. I wouldn't have waited until the sport was over, because I could have, as I like to say, I could have played like my life depended on it, knowing that my life didn't depend on it. See,
Mm.
I didn't know that my life didn't depend on it because I'd gone all in and I didn't have balance. So, like with Dylan, it's, hey, are your friends your friends, your mom, your dad, your relative, like your family, and are you just Dylan to them? Because it's really important that you are just a human being with
Mm.
your inner circle. And
Yeah.
that makes him even more of an intense hockey player when he chooses to play hockey, right? So the doing is a choice, it's not your identity. And you can play at an even higher intensity and a higher level and more consistency. So yes, but to answer your question, I am already dismantling it before the dismantling happens, because there's a
Nice.
strength in knowing that you are not this doing. And so it's a natural progression where you're creating, like Kobe, when he made it to the NBA, he did it when he was 19 out of high school, and he saw someone get cut in the neighboring locker. Someone, the career came to an end, and he realized that could be me at any day. I could get a really serious injury. And so he started to explore, am I outside of basketball? And he tried a lot of different things, but eventually landed on storytelling. And so Kobe would go and meet with Oprah. He would go and meet with Eisner, he was in charge of Disney, and he would ask them, how do you run studios? So he's doing the same thing he was doing with basketball, but he was doing it, the doing of the next thing after. And within 3 years of his retirement, he won the Oscar, doing the same
Jeez.
process that he had done as a basketball player.
I didn't know that.
That's what I'm trying to do with people is, you are more than this sport. And guess what? Winning is not fulfilling, because everyone that I've helped win, I always ask them a simple question, which is kind of a trick question. What does it feel like? And they go, oh my gosh, it's amazing. Ah, ah, ah. And right away they'll say, let's go do it again.
Yeah. Yeah.
We just saw it, the NBA, the Knicks, they hand the trophy to the owner. 53 years it's taken for him to get his hands on that trophy. And the very first thing he says, we're going
What?
to go do it again. And I
Oh
was
my
like,
gosh.
just shut up and enjoy right now.
Yeah.
Right now, good enough. It took you 53 years to get here now. Just be here now. And
Yeah.
you're already not happy, right?
Yeah.
You're already empty, and you need to go repeat and three-peat. And so my point is that all these sports, all these things are all made up. There's nothing wrong with that, but understand that it's not fulfilling. The thing that's fulfilling is everything you'll go through to get the trophy. The journey is the thing that's fulfilling. The trophy is just kind of a cool, kind of mile marker, if you will, on the journey.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay, so now you transitioned to becoming a coach. What is that transition like? You go from people telling you that you should, that you should really tell these stories, you should really help people out, and now you're like, okay, now I'm gonna get clients. Now it's make it into a business LLC. Like, if you could just, quickly summarize, like, how do you go about that, and what's that like for you?
Well, it took a while for me to even, and I actually believe in mentors. So I have some really good mentors, and I needed a lot of coaxing along the way to like go, is this really a thing? And can I really make a difference? And, so there's an interesting thing. I mean, it's no more comfortable than it was as an athlete. It's actually more stressful at times because I'm not actually the one out there doing the performance.
Mm.
So you have to meet people where they're at, and everyone is extremely different from each other. Just like my brother and I are polar opposites. Same thing with, all these great performers. They're all very different versions. But the one trait that they all have is they're stubborn. The stubbornness has allowed them to achieve a lot because they just keep sticking with it.
Mm.
But your stubbornness can get in your way as much as help you. So I have to be, very. I think I have to be empathetic. Sit in the unknown, go through the discomfort with them. We problem solve together. But I also at times have to be very stubborn as well, to push back and say, no, this is whatever it is. and it's usually a lot more simple than they're making it. And what I feel like my role is that's so significant, it is we have so much information on the internet now. We're surrounded by it with our algorithms on social media. So if you're
Yeah.
even interested in this stuff, the mental training and all that, you're surrounded by it. So I always say, you probably already know all this stuff. And if I know the parents or the coaches, I'm like, they probably told you all these answers anyways. But what I bring into the conversation in the relationship, which is, like really keeps the glue, it's literally the glue, is that we have accountability. We have repeat accountability conversations. And that's what's key, because it's not
Mm.
about knowing something. That's a massive planet that we have now that we're on all the time, whenever we're on a device, especially. But this tiny little island planet the, is the planet of doing. That's where we got to get to. We got to go do it. It's not about knowing it, it's about doing. And then if it's high pressure, high stakes, it's an environment that's very uncomfortable. So you have to do it when you're really uncomfortable.
Mm.
And that takes practice and it takes accountability. And so you kind of have to work with, who they are, what motivates them, put the tools in front of them, say, you pick, and then we will, customize this tool for you. So as far as it's kind of it's progressed, but just like any sort of success, it's normal. Like I could just tell you story after story of all these like high profile people, from billionaires to Netflix film director that released the number one film on the planet, and we worked pre to post for that whole project to even get greenlit in the first place, to great individual performances, um, team performances. But it's very normal. It's just normal. And in a normal space, you still have the elements of being a human being. And I have imposter. I drop the word syndrome, but I feel like an imposter a lot. But I've
Mm.
learned
Yep.
to embrace that and go, you know what? That's just grounding. That's just a basic level of maybe humility that I might not know. Or maybe this is the last time someone wins, right? The crazy scenarios that our head plays, but
Yep.
I embrace those things. So I try to get into the flow state with each person or each group that I'm with, which is awesome. But it's also really uncomfortable to get there, because you get there from having a lot hanging in the balance and not knowing, and dropping into the wave and then finding
Mm.
it out when you're doing it together.
Mm.
So it's just a very uncomfortable, but not a bad uncomfortable. It's just a very uncomfortable space that becomes very comfortable while you're doing it.
Yeah. And did you know right away that you were gonna kind of do the mental performance side of things and work with like all the sports and businesses and everything, or what were you trying to go mostly into swimming at the beginning? Like what was that arc look like?
Well, at first I was, trying to figure out who it was going to be. And then I had a sales coach. So I believe in mentors and coaches. So I had a sales coach, and he said, well, the lowest hanging fruit is athletes, high profile athletes. Why don't you do that? Because you already speak their language. I was like, duh, I didn't see that. And so I did it. And then I'd get on podcasts like this, and I'd tell my story. And then it would, like the Formula One podcast that I was on, that's where the film director, and he was like, man, I like
Wow.
the way you think, I like the sound of your voice. I want to have that in my life on a regular basis. Would you, meet with me and kind of coach me like you would coach a Formula One driver? And I'm like, yeah, because it works. It works in all the different spaces, because when you have opportunity, you have pressure. And so anytime you're going to ask someone out on a date, you're going to make a speech, you're going to go out and perform, you're going to have pressure. So
Mm.
you have to be able to handle that pressure. And so that's the space of performance. And, it's been able to translate even to, like, I work with high level coders. So these people are like people that code Facebook level, you know? And I'm like, they're not going to want to talk about sports, but they absolutely love the sports. They may not have ever played the sport, but they love how sports represent a clear answer, a clear
Mm,
performance, because there's a beginning, there's a middle, and there's an end, and there's data along the way. So you have the measurements to be able to say there was something right here that we were, putting out there and pressure testing, and these are the tools that we used, and these are the results. And so whether it was a computer person, or it was a fashion designer, or it was a top level athlete or team, I realized like this is the human condition. We
mm,
are all doing this. Like my kids, we were talking about kids earlier, just talking to my kids when they're really little to understand, what does a goal look like to you? What's pressure to you? And you realize everyone of every age is going through these things.
yeah.
So
And
that's been a really interesting part of being able to unravel it. And it's the calling. It's really about sharing this because, I if I can help someone else, I mean that's just I mean it's a true blessing to be able to. It's just a weird sort of thing, reality, to wake up and go, all those weird things of you growing up as a little kid and noticing patterns that no one else is paying attention to, and why do you always think about that stuff, and why are you always pulling stuff apart, and why are you such a crazy dreamer? Like I've always been kind of like this unicorn, you know. And then you have a place all of a sudden where people are like, wait, what'd you just say again? What was that again? What was that tool? How do I do that?
yeah,
And it's just, been very strange in the best sense of it.
I love that. Okay, so you've worked with a ton of different people now, and you've learned, how the everything combines, all the commonalities between them, and then now, how do you kind of describe your, I guess, your keynote topics when you go out and speak?
Um, I basically treat the audience like they're one person. So I'll just go through the performance. I'll start with the level of honesty, which is I'm really uncomfortable right now. I learned that, I remember standing in front of like all these mortgage brokers, like hundreds and hundreds, and I didn't know anyone there. And I was like, am I going to be able to relate to these people? Are they going to think anything I have to offer is worthwhile? And I
Yeah,
was just like, okay, I'm going to treat them like one person, and I'm going to show them before and after, and, see like these are the tools we use. This is a person, they had this dream, and this is what they achieved. Story after story. These are the tools, and they just turned into like little children in front of me. You could just see them just soften and start to imagine what would their life be like if they actually went after what they wanted. So that's what I try to do is when I'm speaking to groups is, you know, be honest with being uncomfortable just to get into the flow state. Like I'm surfing this wave right now and I don't know exactly what I'm going to say and I hope it lands well for
mm,
you. And in that, authenticity, there's a connection in that sincerity, and then I just give very simple practical tools, and I give them proof, and I think that cuts through all the crap of all the noise that we listen to today with all the different people and things.
yep, yep, 100%. And then is there one thing that, like, okay, you say mental performance isn't talked about enough in sports in general. It's just it's kind of left to the wayside. Is there, if you could give them one thing to kind of finish us off here, that is, on your mind, that is really important, that you don't see talked about enough, that we maybe didn't touch on during this episode? And is there anything that you could think of?
I would just say, allow yourself to dream. I know that sounds corny, but really write something down that you want to achieve. Take the approach of the learner, you know, really become curious of others that have gone it, and done it themselves. If you really dig in to the creation behind it and you kind of look at all the greats, they all have the same pattern using the same tools, and anything is possible, I would say. You just got to get out there and start doing it because you don't know anything until you start doing it. So that would
Dude,
be my words of wisdom to wrap with.
yeah, no, I think you've definitely proved that with your stories, the Discovery Channel show, and your brother national championship. Your brother did it in a couple of years. You did it in 5 or 6 years. Like unreal, man. Like I love everything you've shared. It's been incredibly valuable. You even shared all your tips and tactics along the way that you did, to get you to that point. Like it's been incredibly valuable. I hope that you guys all as the audience got a lot of value out of this. I thank you so much, Seth, for being here. And where can the audience find you if they want to look up your stuff?
SethPepper.com, and it's just my name. So it's all the handles: Instagram, LinkedIn, Facebook of Seth Pepper, and just reach out. I love to hear from people, and I like to what they're going through, and we're all in this together.
Love that. Do you have any like speeches or anything that they should pay attention to? A webinar coming out, a program they should do? Anything you want to plug?
Well, you could go to my website. I try to put all the podcasts there, so if people like what this message has been, they can go and I try to be an open book with people. I eventually will write a book. I don't know when that's done.
Yeah, nice.
So, yeah, I have a podcast that I put out called Unlimit Your Potential, just called the Unlimit Podcast. So it's on all the platforms. So conversations with top performers as well. So I would encourage people to look for that as well.
Awesome. Okay, well, perfect. Well, thank you again, Seth, for being here. Thank you guys for watching. Until next time.
Thanks.